I'm Stephen Schueller. I'm an associate professor of psychological science and informatics at the University of California, Irvine, and the executive director of PsyberGuide.org. And I'll be talking about reaching youth in online spaces and the relationship between technology and mental health among children and adolescents, focusing both on understanding the impact of technology on youth and adolescent mental health, as well as thinking about the potential of technology as an intervention to improve youth and adolescent mental health. So in this presentation, I aim to provide some answers to questions that are bounding around youth and technology, thinking about why consider technology for youth mental health problems. And the question that seems to be on everyone's mind nowadays is, isn't technology causing mental health problems? We'll talk a little bit about what types of online supports are youth seeking in online spaces. Why are youth turning to technologies to help support their mental health? And do technologies work? And then I'll talk about some specific products that exist for youth mental health and what are their limitations, focusing on some of the work I've done through One Mind Cyber Guide. So first off, why consider technology for youth mental health? I think it's not hard to sort of understand if you've spent any time around youth recently, that technology has the tremendous potential to be able to reach youth. Youth are interacting with various technologies nearly constantly. In the United States, it's reported that teens spend about 7.5 hours every day with digital entertainment media. They're texting, they're playing games with their friends online, they're on social media, they're spending a lot of time in these online spaces. And not surprisingly, as they have comfort with these spaces, as they've grown up with the internet, they use these online spaces for different health and mental health purposes. So 87% of teens have reported going online for mental health information, and 39% of teens have sought others with similar conditions to conditions that they have online. And so youth are going to these spaces both to gain sort of information and understanding about the different mental health challenges they're facing, but also to find community and connection, to find places where they can find some other people who are going through some of the similar challenges that they are. So there's a lot of media hype around the potential negative impacts of technology on youth mental health, and a lot of discussions around how technology is sort of causing a lot of mental health problems. And I think that this is reasonable to be concerned about, because we do see an increase in mental health problems in youth and adolescents in recent years, especially among young girls, for example. We've seen rising rates of depression and suicide. And at the same time, we've seen increases in technology. And so given these associations, I think a lot of people have thought that there might be some causal relationship between these things. And so here's just some examples of some news headlines that kind of emphasize this media hype that we see. Giving your child a smartphone is like giving them a gram of cocaine. Our smartphones really destroying the adolescent brain. Our smartphones causing our kids to grow in horns. And these concerns have become even more prevalent in the times of COVID, as we've been forced to move to online spaces for practically everything we do, for socialization, for work, for education. People are becoming increasingly concerned about what impacts this might have on the mental health of youth and adolescents. So what do we know about the relationship between technology and its impact on youth mental health? First, I'll note that although we might find some small associations on average, that those associations obscure the fact that there is significant individual variation in this. Some people are helped, but other people are hurt. We also know that online vulnerabilities and impacts often mirror offline vulnerabilities impacts. Kids bring themselves into online spaces, and the online space is brought to the offline world. So things that are challenging for youth in an offline environment, making negative social comparisons to others, thinking that they're not good enough, trying to sort of form their own identity and sort of build good self-esteem. I think these are challenges that we see people coping with both in on and offline spaces, making friends, managing bullying. Another thing is that these offline vulnerabilities are things that we know exist. And so it's not that we're seeing sort of new vulnerabilities in online spaces, but that online spaces might exacerbate some things that we've seen in the past and might provide some more potentials for some things to go on. It's easier to compare yourself to other people when you have a technology that you can open up and see what everyone else is doing at every single moment. And last, I'd like to note, related to this, the first point I made is like one size fits all, so theories and explanations are bound to fail. There's no overall impact of technology on youth mental health. And so I think we have to move to theories and understandings that understand these discrepancies, the individual differences that occur, and how different people and different technologies are impacting youth mental health. And I'll talk a little bit more about some data that speaks to some of those differences later. So there is a growing body of literature, however, that shows that there are positive impacts of technology on mental health, especially for some people. So this is a study that did daily assessments of youth and looked at how they were using technology, how much they were using technology each day. This was done by Mikey Jensen and also Candice Auger is a colleague of mine here at UCI. And they found in doing this sort of daily sampling, the only relationship that emerged was that adolescents actually reported better well-being on days with more connections to other people that they're making through digital media. So on days when youth were texting more or engaging in social media or chatting with their friends, they reported higher levels of well-being. There was no other associations that were found in terms of technology causing mental health problems or causing stress. And so I think that this really speaks to, depending on what people are doing in online spaces, there's a big potential for these things to be helpful. And youth are using online spaces to seek support. So I want to talk a little bit about what types of online supports do youth seek. In the United States, 64% of teens have reported using a mental health app. Teens also turn to social media in times to support the needs that they have, to feel less lonely, to make new friends, to get support and advice. Youth are using technologies in various ways to kind of support their mental health. I think another thing worth noting, and this is shown in the middle figure I have here on this slide, is that youth and adolescents, especially those who are experiencing symptoms of mental health issues, are actually more likely to go seek these things. So this divides up youth that have moderate to severe depressive symptoms as measured by the Patient Health Questionnaire 9, one of the most commonly used measures of depressive symptoms. And they found that youth with elevated rates of depression were more likely to go online for mental health information, more likely to download apps, more likely to look for people with similar concerns, and also more likely to get connected with health providers online. The last figure I have here on the slide is looking at what happens actually when these youth go to social media to use it potentially to kind of cope with some of these mental health challenges. And they found that for a good number of people, 30% of youth actually, they reported that when they're feeling depressed, stressed, or anxious, going to social media actually makes them feel better. Compared that to only 22% of youth that say they're feeling worse. And so again, we really have to understand the individual differences that occur when we think about the impacts of technology or social media on youth and adolescent mental health. I have a couple kids, 3 5-year-olds actually. And so I went to one of them, Ella, the one there in the blue shirt, and asked her, Ella, what types of technologies do you think might be able to help kids be more resilient? And she looked at me and said, Daddy, what's resilient? I said, like bouncing back from challenges or learning how to do well despite when bad things happen to you. And she said, oh, I know, I have 2 that really work, Minion Run and Mario Party. And I was like, well, how does Minion Run build resilience? And she said, well, sometimes you get knocked out or you don't get the thing you want and you have to keep going and you learn to jump back into the game. And so I think that's another place when we look or try to understand what youth are turning to is things like video games that are not only sources of entertainment, but are also places of social emotional development. Talk a little bit about some research that I did with Lana Yarosh a couple years back, where we went to middle schoolers and tried to co-design ideas for technologies with them after giving them some education and positive psychological strategies like gratitude, mindfulness, and problem solving. So first we taught them some pause psych strategies, then we taught them some ways and to be an inventor and really followed like the IDEO strategies in that regard. And then we came up with some ideas for technologies. Now, no, we didn't build these technologies, although we probably should have. There were some really good ideas here. But we were really interested in the types of ideas that the kids came up with. What was it that they were interested in building? What did they think technology could do to promote their well-being? And there were some great ideas: mindfulness backpacks, robots that sent letters of gratitude, FaceTime-like thing that connects with experts. I think one thing that was really interesting is when we coded these ideas for different engagement supports, the variety of different things that you thought were really engaging. So games and gamification were there, which I think is like the number one thing we think about as developers or adults that kids want. Oh yeah, let's build kids games. They'll love that. But they also loved other things. They liked sensory things, gadgets that release cookie smells, social support, ways to help them connect with other people, special interests, ways in which technologies can connect youth around affinities, a baseball card trading app, something that helps youth connect with something they really care about and they like. And so I think when we think about technologies to help youth, we really have to think about the engagement strategies that make sense to them, not the engagement strategies that make sense to adults. We also looked at the proposed technology solutions that they were interested in. And again, although we saw a lot of apps and a lot of software, we also saw a variety of other things: toys and gadgets, wearables, robots. And what was interesting is that the 8 ideas that the youth wanted to run with and develop more of, to iterate on, were not the apps. It was the physical stuff: this mindfulness backpack, a watch that keeps track of the good things that happens in people's life, a social robot that helps them connect with other people. Youth were really interested in these tangible, wearable, embodied aspects of mental health and wellness that could happen through technology rather than building software. And so I think that that's one thing that's really interesting when we think about technology for youth: is how do we build more technologies that fit the types of things that they want technology to do? So I want to tackle a point that I get asked time and time again, is like, well, do these things actually work? Can technology be useful for promoting mental health? And we find in a lot of different instances, the answer is yes. There's building evidence that mental health technology, specifically apps, can help with depressive symptoms, anxiety, stress, particularly when supplementing standard care, connecting to another person. When these things get embedded into care pathways, working with clinicians, peers, family members, these things can be very efficacious. So I want to move on and kind of conclude by talking about some specific products that exist for youth, but also what are some of the limitations here, and to dive a little bit into this emerging world of digital mental health, which includes internet websites, mobile apps, wearable devices, and virtual reality. I'm going to focus mostly on apps because that's where I do most of my work. As I mentioned, I run One Mind PsyberGuide, which is a project that aims to produce unbiased reviews around digital mental health products, mainly apps. And the reason why a project like PsyberGuide is so useful is because there's a whole lot of stuff out there, and there's very little stuff that's backed by evidence. So there's estimates that 10 to 20,000 mental health apps exist, but less than 5% is supported by evidence. What do these mental health apps do? Well, they can do a variety of different things. They can help people track symptoms. They can teach evidence-based practices like cognitive behavioral skills. They can provide opportunities to chat with artificial intelligence or chatbots to be able to do sort of all of the above. They really are different ways to leverage technology to spread information, knowledge about psychological interventions and psychological practices. There's a variety of apps out there that are specifically focused on youth, although not as many as adults. And I think one of the challenges we see with these youth-focused products is that although some do tailor and build products specifically for youth. So for example, I have in the middle of the screen here an app called Hatch, which is a mindfulness app that has this very sort of gamified aspect where through doing meditations, you hatch this egg and build these little creatures. Headspace has a collaboration with Sesame Street to build these monster meditations using Sesame Street characters that kids are familiar with. You see a lot of other instances though where we take adult content and put it into a kid packaging. So this app here I have at the beginning of the screen is asking youth to fill out a crisis plan. What's the 3-digit emergency phone number? What's your hospital name and address? Asking about symptoms in very sort of adult ways. So in asking about potential symptoms for bipolar disorder, do you sometimes have abnormally high mood, energy, or irritability? Do you need less sleep? Are you very talkative and have lots of ideas? This might include going on spending sprees or taking big risks. But coming from a very kid-looking character, this cute little cartoon fox is spreading these things. And so I think one of the challenges, one of the limitations we see in this space is we often build adult worlds and think that we've built kid worlds by putting in these packagings that make it look kid, but very much kind of build off of adult concepts and adult interventions. And so we see a lack of true youth-centric development in these online spaces. Here's a product we created at PsyberGuide, which is just a pocket self-care toolkit that talks about some potential different apps that are focused, might be useful for some different things that youth might be interested in. Taking a breather, so mindfulness apps, talking it out, some of these chatbot apps, gaming your goals, different apps that use gamification principles to support reaching goals or learning skills, tracking your thoughts, monitoring yourself and your own symptoms. And we've disseminated these toolkits through One Mind PsyberGuide and have these available at the web. So I want to conclude with just some opportunities and conclusions. I think it's really important to note we won't get the right answers if we don't ask the right questions. And I think the right questions are not about, is screen time, is technology harming youth and adolescent mental health, or is technology useful for youth and adolescent mental health, but really what are the different types of technologies and the type of content that's useful to be able to bring some value to youth and adolescent mental health. And so we need to refocus the debate and really understand quality and content and not the quantity of time on technologies. It's also, again, important to note that one size will never fit all. Lots of technologies exist, both for informal and formal types of mental health support. I talked about sort of specific mental health apps, as well as technologies like social media, which were never meant to sort of be mental health supports. But both of these worlds have some potential for youth and adolescent mental health if used properly. And we also have to consider ecosystems rather than products themselves. The relationship between a parent and a kid and how we can facilitate positive aspects of that relationship through technology. The relationship between technology and a human and how technologies integrate into traditional pathways of human support. And then the relationship between apps and platforms, because again, one app is never going to meet the needs of everyone, but apps act in a technology ecosystem with each other. We don't have one app that we use, we have a multitude of apps that live on our phone. I also just want to call out that we recently put out a report, myself along with Candace Augers and Mimi Ito, looking specifically at social media and well-being. That's available on the web that kind of talks about some of these challenges and these issues that I brought up in this presentation. And lastly, I'd like to acknowledge the amazing collaborators I've had in this work, Lana Urosh, Candace Augers, and Mimi Ito, and some of the funding that's helped support some of the work that I've talked about. Really interested to talk about this if other people are interested. My contact information is below. Thanks so much.